Hollow Knight is one of the best games I've played in recent memory. It combines the best of some of my favorite genres. Obviously, it's a Metroidvania game, and it does that extremely well. The interlocking world and the sense of exploration that you feel throughout the experience is mind-blowing. But part of the reason it's so good is because it borrows from other genres to add variety to the gameplay to make it interesting. The platforming sections found throughout the game are reminiscent to me of something like Super Meat Boy or even a Mario game. Now, having grown up on these kinds of games and even having explored the more extreme side of it in playing Kaizo and playing fan games, the difficulty that they were willing to introduce in the platforming sections, especially at the White Palace, was a welcome surprise for me. Now, obviously, the other aspect of the game that sort of pushes the boundaries of the Metroidvania genre are the boss battles. Now, obviously, every Metroidvania game has boss battles, and usually they're pretty good, but Hollow Knight clearly has a level of thoughtfulness applied to the combat that other games don't necessarily follow. What I mean is, if you take an actual Metroid game and you get to a boss, say Ridley or Kraid, then the boss moves in simple patterns across the screen. Ridley will go like this, and then it'll be like, whoa! Or, I forget the patterns of Kraid, but I'm pretty sure he pretty much just sits at the side of the screen, and he has like a claw. I think he fires some stuff at you. Whereas, if you look at the bosses in Hollow Knight, I mean, they're jumping all over the place. I mean, the Watcher Knights, you kind of wish that they didn't move so much, honestly, sometimes. What I mean to say is, the fighting patterns of the bosses require a lot of thought and practice to get into. And that's why the game is definitely more difficult than a traditional Metroidvania game, because learning all the patterns of Nightmare King Grim over the course of 2.5 hours is of course going to be a lot more difficult than just dodging Ridley's swoop thing and then firing 20 super missiles at it.
Jesus Christ!
One of the areas that stood out the most to me in Hollow Knight was definitely the Crystal Peak. And I think that's because the atmosphere and the environment of the level really stood out to me. Throughout Hollow Knight, you go down a lot. You go left a lot and right a lot, but you really go down a lot. And as you keep going down, you get this sense that on the top you have these like remnants of a forgotten civilization, and then you go further down and you get these overgrown areas like the green path and the fungal waste, and then you keep going down and you get to places like the deep nest, and you're like, can I please leave now? And then you keep going down anyway, and then you end up in the abyss, and then you find out about your past, and then just ghosts start attacking you at that point, basically. But there's one point in Hollow Knight when you go up. To top this all off, the ambience in the Crystal Peak is incredible. The first time that you walk in, and you hear the theme start playing, you're filled with a sense of amazement. And as you look around you, I mean, of all the areas in Hollow Knight, the Crystal Peak was one of the places where I was the most driven to explore, and I was the most driven to actually get to the end, the top of the area. One, because obviously if you're climbing a mountain and going through these mines, then surely there must be something good at the top. But two, because the music that was playing throughout that area created this sense of mystery, this sense of wonder, and this sense of foreboding, which almost just begged you to keep investigating, to keep climbing, and to see what lie at the top of the Crystal Peak. I want to explore a few aspects of this song in greater depth to get a better reasoning for why it is able to so effectively accomplish what it is trying to do. how is it able to capture the grandeur of the caverns, while also capturing the busyness of the mines, while also capturing a sense of foreboding, which makes the song sound amazing, yet also unsettling? The song is immediately effective at introducing a sense of space. As the pads and strings are introduced, I'm immediately reminded of the Snow Peak theme from Twilight Princess. Both songs have these notes that play in the background and are basically sustained for the entirety of the song. While those notes are being held, there are more notes in the foreground of the song that help establish the mood of the piece. In the case of Crystal Peak, there's an effective use of reverb and delay, which helps the sound in the foreground give the song a sense of space. The main notes in the foreground, played in groups of 3, all have high impact. Besides these, there are lots of other notes that are the effect of a delay playing in the background. To me, the big impactful notes sound like a rock basically falling and hitting somewhere near you in the cave. And then the delayed notes sound like the continual bouncing of the rock against the side of the cave as it falls further away from you. Using this technique throughout the song, there's a sense of space, because you can hear loud, impactful things near you, and as the sounds get further away through the delay, you feel like you're in some place that's extremely vast. Another technique that I think helps define the character of the Crystal Peak is the balancing of low and high sounds. At the bottom of the track, we have the drums. Now, these drums have a level of reverb that is similar to, I think, if you were to actually play the drums in the cave. These booming effects and echoing sounds help contribute to the grandeur of the environment. At the top of the track, we have another pad, which is continually playing these very high notes. If you think about the kinds of sounds that a crystal makes, you can crack it, which can make this very high-pitched shattering sound, almost like glass. Or you can rub the crystal against another material. In some cases, you might get a squeaking sound. In any case, the high-pitched sounds in the track, to me, are similar to the kinds of sounds that crystals make in the environment. So when you have these high-pitched, twinkling or shattering sounds, then that takes the Crystal Peak from just a normal cave to a cave that's filled with these twinkling, shining crystals. And I think it's the balancing of all the elements in the mid-range and the low end that create this grand sense of space, with the elements in the high end that replicate the sounds of the crystal, which give the Crystal Peak its character, and avoid making it sound like just a generic track for a cave, or fail to give it the qualities that a cave track would need in the first place. Now, of course, the Crystal Peak is a lot more than a cave with just some crystals in it. It's also home to the mines. The classic way to go about the Mines soundtrack in a game is to add the sounds of pickaxes or machinery or metal clanging against itself, and then add reverb on top of that, and there you go. You've got a soundscape which essentially sounds like you are in a mines. It's an extremely effective strategy, and the most prominent example I can think of that being done in a game is definitely Mining Melancholy from Donkey Kong Country. An interesting distinction that I noticed in the track for Hollow Knight is that these sounds are present, but they're not actually part of the track. I was listening to the track outside of the game, and I noticed, where are the metal sounds? I heard them all the time when I was playing. And it wasn't until then that I really internalized the fact that the mining sounds in Hollow Knight are incorporated as actual sound effects from what the enemies and entities in the game are doing. So if a bug hits their pickaxe against the crystals, that sound will actually be represented in the game. And I think that's really cool. I think that it steps up the level of realism and atmosphere even potentially above something like the Donkey Kong Country soundtrack, but I also think it's more effort and it takes more of a balance to implement, because you could get too many mining sounds, or you could get too few, or they could end up not really meshing well with the track. Whereas in the Donkey Kong song, if you program each metal clanging sound in the soundtrack, you can be pretty confident that it will work every time. But what I'm pretty impressed by is that as I played through the Crystal Peak, I never thought that any of the mine-like sounds were out of place. In fact, they worked super well with the overall track. And I have to give props, because I think that if you're able to achieve that balance, that's a great way to go about incorporating mine sounds into your track. The Crystal Peaks theme also manages to incorporate the busier aspect of the mines simply by basically speeding up the whole track. So at the beginning we start very slow with these pads and strings, but as you go on, the track eventually starts adding multiple layers of percussion. We get hi-hats, we get rim shots, and even the notes in the foreground start being played faster and faster. And then eventually we introduce this snare line into the piece, and you don't notice it happening immediately, but over the course of all these pieces being introduced, it begins to sound like a pretty busy track that you can imagine a mines being within. I like how all the pieces are introduced gradually rather than all at once. I think it better suits the gameplay experience. When you're getting into the busier parts of the mine, whether it be the platforming challenges, or you're getting closer to a boss, or you're in an area with a lot of machinery, it's not like the setting automatically changes. As with most places in Hollow Knight, you have to go and travel through multiple screens to get to basically the change in environment. It's all very slow over time. Usually the abrupt changes aren't really there. And so to match that, and the soundtrack definitely, I think, matches what you would actually be experiencing as you play through the Crystal Peaks. Then finally, when you get to the boss area in the Crystal Peak, you get this very low guitar, and I wouldn't even say it's aggressive by itself, but in the context of the rest of the instrumentation of the track, it definitely sounds much more aggressive than anything else that's already there. And because of that contrast, it definitely feels like a shift. And that introduction of that specific instrument also seems like a smart choice to me, because whereas getting to a busier environment might be a gradual shift over time, heading into a boss room and having the Crystal Guardian come at you is a rather abrupt encounter. So we get what makes the song feel like this grand mountain with this bustling mines inside. But what is it that makes the song unsettling? Because if you think about the story and the surrounding environment of the Crystal Peak, it is not pleasant. To me, the description of the crystals in game definitely describes them as something that could be almost an addictive substance. It talks about the warmth and the light, which is drawing the bugs ever closer. And, I mean, this completely fits with real life. You have bugs which are attracted to light, and they will get close to said light, even if it happens to kill them. But I also think that the presence of the infection is what's driving most of the insanity of the bugs. So it's almost like something beautiful existed in the Crystal Peaks, and the crystals were this precious metal, this esteemed material. But with the introduction of the infection, the dark side of these crystals is basically introduced, and what once was such a prized possession is now a drug, a driver of addiction and obsession, which causes these bugs to basically mindlessly pursue them until they crumple over or are killed by a traveler, a beast, or by you.
Stevie, are you mining crystals again? What's a crystal?
I spent a bit thinking about whether this creepy aspect was part of the simply atmosphere of the game as you experience it, or if there was something within the song itself which was creating this creepy element. And I eventually came to the conclusion that even listening to the song, independent of the game itself, you're still gonna get these creepy elements. So then I tried to think about, okay, every part that's working in this song, what is it that's creating this unsettling vibe? What is it that's making it more than just a magnificent cave and a bustling mines, but a cave with a dark secret, with this drug, with these bugs that have all gone insane? Eventually, I decided that it was a combination of the instrumentation and these constant pads, which were responsible for the unsettling atmosphere. To test this, I'm going to replicate some parts of the track, change some elements, and then see how it sounds different. First, let's replace the instrumentation at the beginning with a piano and isolate just that instrument to see if we still think it feels unsettling. So in my opinion, that didn't sound nearly as creepy, and paired with the right instrumentation could actually be a happy song. So let's try to make it a little closer to the actual track. Let's substitute the piano for a guitar, and let's add a flute, and let's filter it and add some delay. All right, definitely sounds closer to the original, but still not there. What I think is really one of the key ingredients for the mood of this piece are the high pads, those crystal sounds, and they're basically present throughout the entire piece. So let's add in a pretty high, almost shrill pad, just constantly playing one note throughout, and see if it changes anything. Alright, I think that high pad went a long ways towards replicating the mood of the original piece. There's still a lot that we'd have to add and work on to really capture that same vibe, but I think the high pad is an essential component of the unsettling effect that the track has. I think the explanation is that the high pitch pad is just in of itself unsettling. Think of the times when you've had a high pitch ringing in your ears and it just wouldn't go away. I feel like the sounds in this track might almost be meant to imply that the miners within this cave, they feel something like that constantly. Perhaps it's overpowering. Perhaps it's much, much louder than the background element that it plays in this track. But it's this obsession, this constant ringing, which drives these bugs towards insanity. Additionally, in the lore of the game, there's evidence that the citizens of Hallownest perceive that the crystals sing or whisper to them. In the Dreamnail dialogue of Myla, the tragic miner who you talk to and eventually watch go insane, she says, "I'm so close. Keep singing, crystals. Keep singing so I can find you. Keep whispering, crystals. I can almost hear what you're saying. Perhaps the high-pitched ringing throughout the song is then representative of the singing or whispering that the bugs claim to hear from the crystals. The bugs endlessly chase the song of these crystals, desperate to understand, yet they are always met with insanity. I really appreciate what's being done with the track here, because you have all the other elements, but then you have this high pad in the background, which is a constant reminder of the grim truth of these caves. And that constant reminder changes the dynamic of every other instrument in the piece, and totally changes the mood of the song. What I love about Hollow Knight is that every decision in the game feels thought out. As we just explored with the audio design, each and every piece of the track felt intentional and was designed to help boost the overall effect that the song had on the game. As I play other games, Hollow Knight will be the standard that I measure up against to when I'm looking for these kinds of things and when I'm judging how thoughtfully the game was crafted. I hope you enjoyed the video. I love doing analysis like this, so if you have a suggestion about anything related to any aspect of any video game that you want talked about, please leave it in the comments, and I'd love to make a video about it. With that said, I hope you have a great day.